Hello, GOVA students. Today we're going to be talking about the first of the three passage types that you will find for the Science ACT section. And that passage type represents what's called data representation. It's typically something that involves a lot of charts and graphs. What you will find is that there's typically one or two kind of short paragraphs that accompany a whole bunch of charts and graphs. So a chart being something that is broken down with multiple numbers in it, or a graph, most of us are familiar with this, something that looks like that. They use a lot of these data representation pieces. They are the most common of the ACT questions for science. And it's really easy to break them down, but I want you guys to see some of these examples of what they're going to be asking you to do. So let's say that I have a graph of the average daily high temperature in Yuma, Arizona. And so I've got this thing kind of graphed out. There's some data points here that I can work with. Now, the first type of question that you are going to see is a question that is asking for what's called factual info. So a factual info question is the kind of question that is going to ask you to find a specific data point and show it. So let's say that this thing is asking for what happens on, or what the temperature is on average on January 31st. And what I can do is I can go ahead and just trace this up on my graph, and I can find this exact data point, which looks like it's about 65 degrees Celsius. Or sorry, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, my apologies. So I would say 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That is an example of this kind of factual information version. It's going to have you find something directly from a graph or a data table. These are the easiest type of questions to answer because it's really just asking, do you know how to read a graph or a data table? Now, the second type of question that you will probably encounter is a question that involves something called trends. Now, a trending question is going to ask you the general direction that your data is going. This is typically where you are going to see words like increase and decrease. And as long as you can make sure, I'm going to fix that. As long as you can make sure that you are identifying the correct parts of the graph, these questions can be done very quickly because you don't need to find specific information. You are just finding the general trend in things. So for instance, I can say that between the months of January and the months of July, what we have in general for here is an increase. We are seeing that the average temperature is going up over this timeline. Now, after about June, what we start seeing is that the temperatures are going to start a slow trend downwards. So this is going to be what we refer to as our decrease. And so we have our increase here, we have a decrease here. Now, it might ask you for just a specific timeline, so between January and June, it might ask you for that. Or it might ask you for the general trend, in which case you could say that it increases, then it decreases. And so we can also look at this over a large period of time and figure out what's going on with that. So those are trending questions. So they're looking for general statements about the data. And what you can kind of do is just squint at the graph a little bit, see what's going on, and then make some generalizations about it. Now, the final question type that you guys are going to be looking at is what's called predicting. A predicting data question is going to ask you about information that is not on the graph itself. So, if we're going to be predicting something, we're going to be looking at something that's not on the actual graph. So let's take a look at, once again, our temperature chart for Yuma. We have an increasing temperature right here. We have a decreasing temperature right here. And then our data stops for the month of October. But the question that it might ask you is, what are we predicting is going to happen in November? Now, what we're going to look at is similar to question 2. We're looking for the general trend in things. At this point, I am been on a consistent decrease in temperature through October. It is a reasonable assumption that that decrease will continue into November. And so I can predict that there will be a decrease here, even though I can't prove it from my graph. And that is a kind of predicting question that it might ask you. Now, it might ask you to be something very specific. So let's say that in October, we have an average temperature of about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And so far, I have noticed that every month that we have, I'm losing about 10 degrees. So previous to October, it was 10 degrees higher. Previous to that month, 10 degrees higher than that. If October it's 75, I can take this same trend and I can apply it over here to November and say that I am predicting that November will be 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that is a more specific type of prediction question, but still a kind that you can expect to see on the exam. And those are the three questions that you can expect to see for data representation, which forms a large part of the Science ACT.